Hey, so welcome to our second class of this Spectrum of Compassion series that we're working on. And I just want to start with kind of a little bit of a recap. Last time in our first session, we considered our intuitive sense of the word compassion in its modern usage. And we sort of thought to ourselves and felt into what that word evokes for us. And we considered that what is translated as compassion in early Buddhist texts might not be quite the same thing, given that relational qualities have a cultural component. But nonetheless, we would also expect that human emotions have some degree of universality. So we're sort of walking between those two understandings, right? So we're proceeding by reading suttas, by letting them guide us from the ground up, if you will, into an understanding of what is meant by compassion in these early Buddhist teachings, which come from the Pali Canon, which are around, probably that was written down kind of around the turn of the Common Era. First was compiled a few hundred years after the Buddha died, and then it took another couple of centuries to get that into written form. So we found in the last class many examples of attitudes and behaviors that had to do with caring and with wanting to reduce harm and suffering, right, for ourselves and others. And we saw that compassion, therefore, has to be linked to ethics because that is the realm of practice that is directly connected to wanting to avoid and reduce harm in the world. And we also saw a few scenes that I called sweet, at least. You can have your own view, but a few scenes of the Buddha displaying his own physical vulnerability as he got older. And yet we saw also that he carried the clear wisdom that that is simply the natural way of it. That's part of his teachings, is to come to terms with aging, illness, and death. And then we ended, the last reading we did was the Buddha teaching Nakula Pita, an older guy, that although he is afflicted in body, as it said, he does not have to be afflicted in mind. So this form of compassion, the compassion of teaching the Dharma and helping people to understand, that is really the main part of the Buddha's compassion, as will be woven throughout this course as a thread. There's a sutta that says explicitly, the gift of Dhamma is the greatest gift. And so we see that. But today we'll start digging into some of the different Pali words that are all translated as compassion in English. I mentioned last time that there are several terms that are pretty much all rendered as compassion in English, and then we lose the subtlety that was in the original texts when we only get that one English word for, in this case, all three words that we'll look at today. So this is going to continue to build out our understanding of this spectrum of compassion. And I loved that last time someone said in one of the comments that their understanding of this term was broadening just from what we read last time, which was only, the beginning, right? And that's kind of an aim for me in teaching this class, is to broaden us a bit, broaden our understanding of what compassion is in general, perhaps, and at least in these early texts. Okay, so terminology. Let's look at the terminology. And I want to mention just up front before I go into some more detail that I'm drawing to some degree on the study that Gil Fronsdal has done recently on this term, but I'm also adding my own interpretations and examples and way of talking about it. But he did some of the legwork. So I'm going to put up on the screen, get that up, three different terms. So there are these three different terms that are related to sympathy, empathy, caring, concern, compassion, those kinds of ideas. they're Karuna, Karunya, and Anukampa. And the first two, as you might guess, are related etymologically, but they are actually distinct words, and so they should be considered separately. And let's go through them a little bit. I know there's a lot of stuff there. I'm going to talk through it so you don't have to try to read it all. So karuna, which is a word that many people recognize as one of the four Brahmaviharas and might have said, if I'd asked you, what's the Pali word for compassion, you might have said karuna. So that is metta, mudita, and upekkha, the other three Brahmaviharas, which are usually translated as loving kindness or friendliness or goodwill. Mudita is appreciative joy, altruistic joy, that kind of thing. And upekkha is almost always just equanimity. And so karuna then being compassion, the fourth of these. And this has to do with actually with meditative cultivation and a temporary liberation of the mind. The way it's used in the early teachings is almost exclusively as a meditation practice. There's only a couple of exceptions to that out of these 63 passages, and that's in the whole Pali Canon, 63 passages. So, or it might only be in the suttas, I'm not sure, but anyway, it's definitely at least in the suttas. And this kind of cultivation, cultivating this quality of karuna, whatever it is, counteracts cruelty, is what it says in the text. We'll read that in a moment when we start looking at the passages. Then we have this term karunya, which I bet almost nobody has heard. And it's only used in 8 passages in over 7 suttas, in all of the suttas. Maybe this is actually the best candidate to match the modern English understanding of what we talked about last time. But even that, seems to include other nuances, things like protection, and maybe even honor or valor. So we'll look at some of those 8 passages, and you can choose for yourself what you think is meant by this term. I'll show you where it is. And then by far the most usages, 160, are this term anukampa, which some of you I think would also have heard if you've been around Buddhism a little bit longer. So this is actually a broad term. It's associated with caring in general, not only being concerned with alleviating suffering. So, we care about things as people. We have things that we care about. It includes wanting to enhance others' well-being. It includes wanting to support people's spiritual development and personal development. It does concern wanting to alleviate their suffering, but also these other things. It's used as the motivation to teach the Dharma, to visit the sick, to give and accept gifts. So it's a broad term. Unfortunately, as I said before, all of these get translated as compassion in English translations of the suttas. And so we don't realize which one's being used. We don't even realize there might be 3 different terms being used. So that obscures the distinction. And I would suggest that it might suggest that modern translators are projecting some meaning onto the suttas that may not necessarily be there by always just using compassion, compassion, compassion. And we've already learned, like, what does that mean exactly? And to put it on all of these 3 terms. So I think it's worthwhile to look more carefully. Let's see. So one thing that I would like to note historically is that by the time of a text called the Visuddhimagga, which was a commentarial text from about 900 years after the Buddha, so maybe 400 or 500 years after the Pali Canon was written down, by that time, it's natural that language changes over time, right? It changes, and even the same word will mean something different a few hundred years from now. So by that time, the term karuna, the first one, had migrated in meaning to include an active interest in alleviating suffering. You might note that in what I had just posted on the screen, it doesn't talk about, we'll see in the passages, it doesn't exactly say that karuna is concerned with alleviating suffering. It's something having to do with the opposite of cruelty, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're out there acting in the world to remove suffering. But by the time of the Visuddhimagga, 400 or 500 years later, it had shifted to include more of those meanings. And so this shift in meaning can explain why some of the Mahayana schools, which came later, used karuna as this term as the motivation to teach, for example, which is never done in the suttas, never says that in the suttas, and to help others and so forth. So we are also inheriting a little bit of a shift in the word karuna itself. But if we look at these early texts, it's only used for meditation. This is part of the tangle you get into when you start really looking at these ancient texts, but it's important, I think, to start to see this. And it does inform our practice and how we understand what we're reading. So here we're looking at these earliest texts, which are those of the Pali Canon. And so today we're going to start by looking at suttas that use the term karuna, this word for meditative cultivation. And then we'll go into karunya. And if we have time, we'll start on anukampa and then continue from there. We have one more class after today. We'll kind of see how it unfolds. Okay, so then I think we're ready to go on to the passages, unless anyone has any questions at this point. Let me pause and ask, how are you doing? Okay. Liz, you have a question.
Yeah, I wondered how you would feel about substituting the pronouns he for she. I won't do it if it makes you uncomfortable.
Oh, it's okay to change pronouns to she in your own understanding, or change it to they, or shift the
Okay.
way the sentence is structured to be one. Mostly this is a matter of laziness for me in preparing this, as I was just copying from
No, I know,
text.
I just
Yeah.
wondered, because it's probably not done much, but it
Oh,
helps
no, it's
me.
actually done quite a lot.
Really?
I was
Oh,
feeling a
I've
little
never
bit
heard
guilty.
it, but it certainly helps me. And I have a question. You said in the earlier passages, it's only meant for meditation. I didn't understand what you meant by that. Compassion is only meant for meditation?
No, the term karuna,
Yeah,
which translated as compassion, is
right.
only used in passages that relate to meditative cultivation.
So it doesn't mean release from suffering.
It doesn't mean acting in the world. That is reserved for karunya and anukampa. The other terms are used in that context. So the context of the word karuna is in sitting on the cushion and cultivating something that counteracts cruelty.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So
Not
it's good.
acting.
It's doing good. It's helping us to be caring and non-cruel.
Okay.
So to me, the opposite of cruelty is pretty
Thank you.
close to compassion. But yeah, you got it. Okay. Great. Let's shift and start looking, letting the Buddha do the teaching and look at some of these passages. Can you see that? Yes. Okay. Great. So I need to scroll down a bit to, this is now last week's. Okay. Karuna, meditative cultivation. Okay, so this is a teaching now on that the Buddha gives to his son, Rahula. And it's part of a much longer discourse, but I've just picked out this part on cultivating the 4 Brahma Viharas, which are named here, the 4 heart qualities. So Rahula, develop meditation on loving kindness, metta. For when you develop meditation on loving kindness, any ill will be abandoned. Develop meditation on compassion, karuna. When you develop meditation on compassion, any cruelty will be abandoned. Develop meditation on altruistic joy, mudita. For when you develop meditation on altruistic joy, any discontent will be abandoned. Develop meditation on equanimity, upekkha. For when you develop meditation on equanimity, any aversion will be abandoned. So here we see, interestingly, what is considered, in this case, the opposite of each of these. So it makes sense that loving kindness, we also see why metta is sometimes translated as goodwill, because it's always opposed to ill will. Cruelty is something that's the opposite of karuna, compassion. It's a reasonable translation. Altruistic joy counters discontent. That's an interesting one. We have to see that in practice sometimes, but discontent being around kind of, disgruntled, envious, unhappy about the situation. So developing joy for the happiness of others counteracts this. And then in this case, equanimity is countered to aversion. Sometimes it's positioned opposite passion, or, kind of grasping at things, or partiality. So these kind of make sense. But these are, it's very clear, right? Develop meditation on each of these four. Very clear that that's the context. And then we go on. I wanted to read this next one because it says somewhat clearly what we're supposed to do in this meditation. How do we actually do that? So this is from Majjhima Nikaya 7. So this is about the person reflecting on their own qualities. He or she considers thus, or they, the imperfections of the mind have in part been given up, expelled, released, abandoned, and relinquished by me. And they gain inspiration in the meaning, inspiration in the Dhamma, gladness connected with the Dhamma. When they are glad, rapture is born. In one who is rapturous, the body becomes tranquil. One whose body is tranquil feels pleasure. In one who feels pleasure, the mind becomes concentrated. So we're talking about a meditative process. The mind becomes gathered. Then, how does one abide? One abides, pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness, metta, again. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. That means all the directions around us, north, south, east, west. So above, below, around, completely and everywhere, they abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. And then the same for the others. They abide, pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with compassion, whatever this word is, karuna, mudita, upekkha, likewise the second, third, and fourth. So above, below, completely and everywhere, they abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So this is a heart cultivation. We're developing the mind and heart, the citta, such that it is boundless. It's able to spread these heart qualities in all directions, encountering any person, any situation boundlessly. Obviously, this is an ideal. We don't start with this ability. We start saying, well, I'll have goodwill for my family and my friends, but not that person. No way. and then we realize, okay, that's actually a limitation on my heart. That's a limitation on my meditative development, my being. And so then we work with these meditations to make it more possible for us to have this expansive feeling in all directions for everyone. So this is something that is encouraged in this tradition to cultivate on the cushion and to develop this kind of mind. And it spills over into daily life, but these are not daily life practices. We can walk through the world trying to radiate, it's true. But we also have to attend to our life. This is something that we would do on the cushion. There's even a concentration practice. This does lead to concentration of the mind, and you may have heard of the jhanas, meditative absorption. meditative absorption can occur based on any of the Brahmaviharas also. So these are clearly meditation on the cushion, concentration type practices. So I want also to mention this liberation or deliverance of mind that can come about. That again is a meditative cultivation, a meditative attainment. Actually, it's not final liberation. It's what's called a temporary liberation, where the mind is temporarily completely free from the opposite of whatever quality you're cultivating. So this is this MN 99 excerpt. He abides pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Starts again with this one. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. This sounds familiar, right? So above, below, around, completely and everywhere. He abides pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Just as a vigorous conch shell blower could make himself heard without difficulty in the four quarters, so too, when the deliverance of mind by loving kindness, metta ceto vimutti, is developed in this way, no limiting action remains there, none persists there. So no limiting qualities of mind persist. And then the same for the other three. So these Brahmaviharas almost always occur together in this set of four, and Karuna is this one of them that's identified with compassion. So we have this liberation of mind. That's where it becomes boundless, where we know that absolutely nothing can taint the pervasion of the mind with this heart quality. So it may sound incredible, but even if your least favorite politician were to come into your mind, you would have nothing but loving kindness and compassion for them. And you would feel it completely, and you would feel the power and the strength of that. So this is an attainment that we would work toward. So this temporary liberation of mind is very purifying, very beautiful. It really gives us the understanding that the heart is stronger than any defilement. And that's a good thing to know if we're on the path to awakening. And then one more thing I want to read is this connection, this Karajakaya Sutta, which shows the connection between these heart qualities and action out in the world. But it makes it clear that one is in one domain and one is in the other domain. So let me ask, would somebody be willing to read this one out loud? As I mentioned before, I like it when we participate. So I wonder if I can't see all of you. So if you're, there we go. Donna, thank you. Go for it, Donna.
Okay. So it's AN 10.219.
Yes.
Okay. The Buddha asks, what do you think? Suppose a youth were to develop the liberation of mind by loving kindness, metta ceto vimutti, from childhood on. Would this person still perform unwholesome deeds later on? The monks reply, certainly not, Blessed One. The Buddha says, suppose a youth were to develop the liberation of mind by compassion, karuna, by altruistic joy, mudita, by equanimity, upekkha, from childhood on. Would this person still perform unwholesome deeds later on? The monks reply, certainly not, Blessed One.
Right. Thank you. And I did see your hand, Joni. You can read the next time we have one. So again, we see this connection between the heart qualities and including compassion and ethics, performing unwholesome deeds out in life later on. So this would be amazing if a child could have this development from childhood on, but a person who has really, I think the implication is a person who has really cultivated this over a long time, really devoted themselves to it, would they be able to do unwholesome actions? Would they be able to do harm out in the world? And the monks say, no, that wouldn't make sense, right? So there's this, again, this connection between ethics and compassion. And so this is a pretty good sampling of the suttas that include this quality, karuna. compassion. It is compassion, but it's something that we cultivate in order to counteract the tendency toward cruelty. And we might say, oh, I don't have any cruelty. That would be bad. I'm not a cruel person. We're not saying you're a cruel person, but there is, there can be a tendency especially under stress or difficult circumstances. We know that our mind can close down and close out another person. So we can cultivate these heart qualities to make it more likely that out in the world we will not close down in that way. So that's what these cushion cultivations are for. And this is really the what is happening often with karuna. That's what this quality is referring to. So let me ask if there are any questions at this point about karuna. Okay. Very good. So then I think we can go on to the second one, Karunya, the one that's not very well known, and the one that appears in only 8 passages across 7 suttas. But worth noting, because some of them are actually important. One of them was from section 1, and we read it before. So now we see what the word that was translated as compassion there is. So I'll read this one. Suppose a sick, afflicted, gravely ill person was traveling along a highway, and the last village behind and the next village ahead were both far away. They would not obtain suitable food and medicine or a qualified attendant. They would not get to meet the leader of the village district. Another person traveling along the highway might see this person and arouse sheer compassion, karunya, sympathy, and tender concern, anukampa. There's our third word. We haven't gotten to that one yet, passages on that one yet, for them, thinking, oh, may this person obtain suitable food, suitable medicine, and a qualified attendant. May they get to meet the leader of the village district. For what reason? So this person does not encounter calamity and disaster right here. So this was the one where we thought, yeah, this, this is something that sounds familiar, caring about the suffering of another, hoping that it gets alleviated. Not necessarily, it doesn't say that this person is going to alleviate it, notice, but it says that they hope that they get a qualified attendant, hope they get to meet the leader of the village who might provide resources for them. So certainly we have, a sense of compassion and care and concern for the suffering of another in this situation. So I'm going to suggest that this one we can intuitively grasp as, yeah, okay, that's a form of compassion, relates to our intuitive sense, the English word of what it is. So now we have another scene. The setting, I'll read the setting part and then I'll ask for a volunteer to read this one. So Venerable Sariputta, who is one of the Buddha's 2 primary disciples, 2 chief disciples, primary in wisdom, fully awakened arahant. And he's given a teaching. And one of the junior monks objects to it. He doesn't like Sariputta's teaching. Kind of cheeky to do that. And the Buddha is even present during this teaching. And so that's the scene. I've just cut out one part of it to make it easier for us to read. Would somebody read this little exchange? Maybe Joni, you had your hand up before. If you're willing. No. Yes? Okay.
Sure, yeah, sure. I'll do that. Thank you. This is not possible, Reverend Sariputta. It cannot happen. But for a second and a third time, Sariputta repeated his statement. And for a third time, Udaya said to him, this is not possible, Reverend Sariputta. It cannot happen. Then Venerable Sariputta thought, even in front of the Buddha, Venerable Udaya disagrees with me 3 times, and not one mendicant agrees with me. I'd better stay silent. Then Sariputta fell silent. Then the Buddha said to the Venerable Ananda, Ananda, there's a senior mendicant. being harassed and you're just watching it happen. Don't you have any compassion, karunya, for a senior mendicant who's being harassed?
Yeah. It's got a little dramatic element in it, right? Sometimes the suttas are quite engaging. So we can imagine the scene, right? And so this younger monk is challenging him, and the Buddha makes it into a teaching moment for who? For Ananda, who's another one of his senior, his attendant, but also another well-known disciple. And he says, "Hey Ananda, look, Sariputta being harassed, and you just watch it happening. Don't you have any karunya, whatever that is, for a senior mendicant who is being harassed?" Now, Sariputta is an arahant. He's fully awakened. So it's kind of by definition, he's not hurt by Udayi's statements. He's not sitting there saying, "Oh my gosh, I feel terrible. Did I screw up? Maybe I don't understand the teachings." This is not the case. His part about maybe I should stay silent is maybe there's something going on here with the Buddha, or maybe like it's better, like he's wanting to teach Udayi, and so I should just stop talking. But he's not having any self-doubt. He's not having any anger toward Udayi. He's not saying, "I can't believe this uppity young guy." So what is this feeling that Ananda is supposed to be having for a fully awakened being? Any suggestions? I mean, compassion is fair enough. It has something to do somehow with the social situation. Don't you have sensitivity? Don't you have a sense of wanting to contribute? So this is about stepping forward and taking action. He's being accused of not taking action. Yes, Deborah. Hi, Deborah, by the way.
Hi, Tim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I got a new microphone and it's working. Nice to see you. It's been a long time. So I'm not sure, because of this new spelling of karuna, what the difference between this and karuna is. But Ajahn Sona defines karuna as loving kindness, metta, in the presence of someone else's suffering. So that's simply how he defines karuna typically. And so it's not having, and you might have, I wasn't here last week, so I apologize if you already had a big discussion about the different meaning of karuna. But in this case, we're assuming that Sariputta is not suffering because he's an arahant. So I'm not quite sure how that fits in here. That's why I'm not sure if this spelling of karunya means something very different from the traditional karuna.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it might have gone by a little quickly. These are etymological cognates, clearly, in a sense, and yet, as I said, they're distinct words that need to be considered differently, because if we look in the suttas contextually, they're used very differently. So we just saw all those examples of karuna being used only for meditation, and now we have karunya clearly being used in a daily life situation. So my sense is that it's intended really to be a different word. It's in the same field, but it's a different word. The part about karuna being metta in the presence of someone suffering, that is, I think, fair enough translation. It does include a little bit more modern understanding of the word karuna. Remember, I said that karuna changed about 500 years after these texts to start including a wishing for well and wanting to take action. So I have the feeling that translation, that modern translation of karuna, is folding in a little bit later understanding of the term. But it could still be, a mental attitude. It still does refer more to a mental attitude the way it's stated. But I have heard that one of how it's metta.
He refers to it as, it's not in the Mahayana way of compassion, but in the.
Yeah, it's from an Ajahn, so it's Theravadan, but he may be using the more commentarial understanding of karuna, which we're broadened out a little bit more. But yeah, that is a good one. It's the way we consider metta to be kind of the basic heart quality that you start with, an open, kind heart of goodwill. And then when that meets suffering, it transforms into some kind of care for that suffering. It makes sense. Yeah, thanks. But this one, Karunya, may have something else going on. Sochi. You're still muted.
Oh, okay. Could it also like include like let me see, Ananda? He's also an arahant.
Actually,
he
he isn't
sees-
in this
Oh,
case.
Oh, okay. I mean,
He's
he's
yeah.
a venerable. He's a somebody, a senior something. Right?
He's a senior monk, but he's
a
not
senior
fully
monk.
awakened.
A
He's not fully
senior
awakened.
monk. Maybe could understand how he would feel if he was giving a talk and someone was harassing, and maybe just needing to like come to his friend's defense a little bit, because maybe that's how he would want, you know, someone to respond if he was put in that situation.
Yeah, that's
Something like
possible.
that.
Yeah. Thank you. Alicia.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to add maybe in this, from what I'm thinking is maybe from, Buddha's trying to tell Ananda that, take action, because compassion doesn't really always mean being, passive, not responding. I guess you shouldn't react, but like responding is okay in situations of injustice. I guess that can happen. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's my take is that like Buddha wants Ananda to respond in some way, but with compassion.
Yeah, I think he's clearly asking him to respond. So yeah, I think you're right about that. He's asking him to step up in some way and not just sit there. Donna. Oh, or was that an accidental hand?
Oh no, sorry, I thought it was unmuted. I was thinking if the Dharma is the key to relieve suffering, then the Buddha may be encouraging Ananda to protect the Dharma and to protect real gurus and real teachers, and not just have it be a free-for-all where people are tearing down people who have others who have realizations and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's also a part of it. So we have an interesting combination of taking action, presumably inviting him to do so in a compassionate way, not a reactive way. But yeah, there's something about protection in there. The definition of karunya in the Pali English dictionary includes a dimension of protection. In this case, protecting the Dharma. Not Sariputta doesn't need protection as an awakened person, but yeah, protecting the Dharma, protecting the container, the situation where we shouldn't be let this junior monk just keep harassing this guy. And I didn't tell you earlier, but it did come up in the questions. Ananda is not actually awakened, and so needs training. And so the Buddha might have selected him as he's a guy who doesn't speak up very much, and so I'm going to train him by asking him to be the one who speaks up. Maybe Ananda was actually known to have a tendency to be a super nice guy. And so the Buddha might have been saying, let's see, who can I pick in the whole assembly to be the one who really should have spoken up here? Oh, Ananda, hey, you, how come you didn't speak up? And so, training him to take that action. So this is does this sound a little bit more familiar, a little bit more like how we use compassion in English as, taking action? In this case, it's not to relieve suffering necessarily, but it's kind of a protective stepping forth because there's something going on that isn't quite right. I would suggest yes. So that's an interesting. So this is probably the best candidate, as said in sheet that best candidate for what our intuitive sense of compassion is, this word karunya. And then we have the interesting case that it's referred to when the Buddha was considering teaching. And some of you know that when the Buddha first became awakened, he, at the beginning, didn't want to teach. He decided not to teach, and then he had to be convinced. This is part of the lore, you know, it's part of the story of how this goes. And I put a fair amount in here to give context, but it made it kind of long. So I'll try to read through it in a succinct way. So this is the Buddha speaking right after his awakening. I considered this Dhamma that I have attained is profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle to be experienced by the wise. But this generation, or like every generation, delights in attachment, takes delight in attachment, rejoices in attachment. It is hard for such a generation to see this truth, namely dependent origination, essentially, conditionality. And it is hard to see this truth, namely the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. So that's meant to all point toward it's hard to see nibbana or nirvana. If I were to teach the Dhamma, others would not understand me, and that would be wearying and troublesome for me. Not suffering, but Buddhas can still be wearied. Considering this, my mind inclined to inaction rather than teaching the Dharma. So then, this is terrible, and the Brahma Sahampati up in the Brahma world knew with his mind the thought in my mind, and he considered the world will be lost, the world will perish, since the mind of the Tathagata, the Buddha, accomplished and fully enlightened, inclined to inaction rather than to teaching. And so just as very quickly he appears before the Buddha, he arranges his upper robe on one shoulder and extending his hands in reverential salutation, pleading, he says, "Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One teach the Dhamma. Let the Sublime One teach the Dhamma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are wasting through not hearing the Dhamma." Now that to me sounds like compassion. He's the one who sees the suffering and says, oh no, you need to teach. There are people who are falling away without hearing the Dharma. And so then it says, well, then I listened to the Brahma's pleading, and out of compassion, Karunya, this word for beings, I surveyed the world with the eye of a Buddha. Surveying the world, I saw beings with little dust in their eyes, and with much dust in their eyes, with keen faculties and with dull faculties, with good qualities and bad, easy to teach and hard to teach, and some who dwelt seeing fear and blame in the other world. But he sees all of this, so he sees the reality. Yep, some people are going to get it and some aren't. But there are some who are going to get it. And so then he says, open for them are the doors to the deathless. Let those with ears now show their faith. Thinking it would be troublesome, I did not speak the Dhamma, but he's sort of indicating that I now will. And then he thinks to himself, I considered thus, to whom should I first teach the Dhamma? Who will understand this Dhamma quickly? So he doesn't say, I'm going out into the world to end suffering for all beings. I'm going to save all beings. He says, who's going to get this? He's like, who's going to be easy to teach? Who has little dust in their eyes? So, eventually he kind of broadens out and teaches basically everybody who comes to him. He has no limitation about that. But initially he had to think about it. And he decided to start where it would be effective. Why not? Start where it's going to be most effective. And so we have this intriguing phrase. I listened to this person telling me that it would be possible. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who will understand what you're saying. Right? He complains, no one will understand. The Brahma Sahampati says there are some who will understand. At that point, he surveys the world out of karunya for beings. What is that quality? I think compassion is a reasonable translation, but it may not be exactly what the larger mythology of the Buddhist says, especially not the later mythology about him being on a quest to remove all suffering from all beings everywhere. It's a little more scaled down in the early teachings. But I wanted to share this one because this is, I think, an important passage. It's the one about the Buddha deciding to teach. Fred, your hand was up.
Yeah, this is where he sort of brings in caring, right? About caring for others.
Yeah,
Right.
he does care. He decides, I do care about this world. I care about it. I'm going to look at it carefully. I'm going to look at it strategically. I'm now projecting a little bit on what you said, but yeah, it is a care, a sense of caring. You know, this is the world I'm in. This is where it is. Let me see what I can do. Fair enough. Yeah, so it's compassion, but it might be a broader understanding of compassion than we might reflexively assign. Okay. So I like all these definitions of compassion, by the way, and I think we're learning a lot about this term. Are there any other questions at this point? Because otherwise we will leave Karunya. Okay. Good. So remember also that this is the one that where there's only 8 instances of it in the texts. So it's not a super common word. It does happen to be used in some important cases, but it's not a super common word in the Pali Canon. So moving on to Anukampa, that is the one. Remember that there were 160 instances compared to 63 for Karuna and 8 for Karunya. So this is by far the most common term that's also translated as compassion. And so we have some examples of the Buddha acting and teaching out of whatever this term is, Anukampa. So in particular, there's one where he's talking to Mara, the enemy, if you will, not enemy exactly, but the personification of distraction and unwholesomeness and other things. And the Buddha says to him confidently, I sleep in peace, full of compassion for all beings. Mara's taunting him at the time, and the Buddha says, nah, I don't have any troubles in the world. I sleep in peace, full of anukampa for all beings, full of care for the world. And then I'm going to pull out another one that we had above, again, repeated from section above to this one about Prince Abhaya, where he was talking about a teaching on speech. So he said, the Buddha is saying, so too, Prince, such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Buddha does not utter. But such speech as the Buddha knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, but which is unwelcome and disagreeable, then the Tathagata knows the right time to use such speech. So we talked about how this was discerning, right? Compassion doesn't always have to be happy, and it doesn't always have to be welcome to others. Why is that? Because the Buddha has anukampa, compassion for beings. So sometimes he does things that people find disagreeable and unwelcome, but he does it out of compassion because he's teaching them. He's telling them something that is true, correct, and beneficial, even if they don't want to hear it. So we again see that there's this acting and teaching. Doesn't mean that we're always making nice and always doing things that will make people like me, but you know, there's this sense of sometimes you have to do these other things. And then we have the Buddha's perceived this way by others. So the monks are thinking of the Buddha. The Blessed One is compassionate and seeks our welfare. He teaches the Dhamma out of compassion. So seeking their welfare. Notice that it doesn't say the Blessed One is compassionate and wants to end our suffering. I mean, he would want to end their suffering if he was seeking their welfare, but might seeking someone's welfare also include supporting them in their happiness and helping them to develop concentration if they want to, or things like that. So it's a little bit, we see that it's broader than merely seeing somebody in pain and suffering and grief and sorrow and terror and coming to their rescue. I think the term seeking welfare is broader than that. It would include the first, but it includes other things too. And then we have this general thing that the Buddha often says. This is a passage that's repeated a number of times. Whatever should be done, monks, by bhikkhus, monks, by a compassionate teacher out of compassion for his disciples, desiring their welfare, that I have done for you. So there's no limitations on what he does. He does absolutely everything that he can for their welfare. So this, I think, is a demonstration of anukampa as this general term, care, that includes sympathy, empathy, alleviating suffering, taking action, and supporting happiness and peace and other things that help bring about people's welfare and well-being in the world. And then we have this one, that the Buddha's teachings can inspire the quality of anukampa in his followers. So that's important too. This first part is a stock passage that's used in a lot of teachings about a Buddha arising in the world. And I wonder if someone would be willing to read these two paragraphs that are here, just so we can hear someone else's voice. Someone willing to read out loud? Thanks, Fred.
A realized one arises in the world, perfected, a fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, holy, knower of the world, a supreme guide for those who wish to train, teacher of gods and humans, awakened, blessed. He realizes with his own insight this world, with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, gods and humans, and he makes it known to others. He teaches Dhamma that's good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, meaningful and well phrased, and he reveals a spiritual practice that's entirely complete and pure. A householder hears that teaching. They gain faith in the realized one, and at some later time, they take up the training and livelihood of the mendicants. They give up killing living creatures, renouncing the rod and the sword. They're scrupulous and kind, living full of compassion, anukampa, for all living beings.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this shows the inspirational quality of the Buddha to inspire people to stop doing harm and to live with compassion, anukampa, for all beings. And here it's directly opposed to the first, violating the first precept of killing living beings. So the opposite of that is to lay down the weapons, no longer kill, and dwell with anukampa, care and compassion for all human beings. So again, we see this counteracting of cruelty, right? Remember from the meditative training. So I think we're actually going to stop there. Yeah, let's stop there. And we have more to do. There was actually one more passage that I had sent ahead of time, but we'll skip it for now. And because we'll do it next week, along with some others that I'll bring in. But I wanted to pause in case there were any further questions at this point. And then we'll do a meditation. What do you think of these 3 different terms? Did you know there were 3 terms? And there are different frequencies and usages. Yeah, Alicia.
I just wanted to comment that it's interesting because Anukampa is actually, I think, a Sanskrit word as well. In
Yes, it
Sanskrit,
is.
it means grace. And I think a lot of it, we use it like in Hindu language, like meaning grace for Anukampa. That's a common term
Interesting.
that we use. Yeah, but it's interesting that in suttas it's considered more of compassion. Yeah.
More compassion. So it seems to
Yeah.
be another one of those words that may have changed in meaning over time. I mean, after
Right.
all,
Yeah.
this is 2 millennia earlier, the term could have had a different
Yes.
sense, a different shade. Thank you. I didn't know that about the modern usage of it. Sochi.
I just wanted to make the comment that, you know, when you're first coming into these study and trying to get it all together, trying to figure things out, and you hear strange words, even English words like self, no self, you're like, what is that? You know, but it's really nice to hear, especially when something has to be translated to another language. Like me, I speak Spanish, and sometimes I could hear someone say, "Oh, this means that," and I'm in my head, I'm thinking, "No, not quite. It doesn't quite mean that. You know, you got it wrong." But yeah, I mean, I really appreciate hearing all the different, rather than to just always be saying, taking it for granted. Hey, they said Karuna's compassion. I have to go with that. I don't know any better. But this has been really nice to hear the differences. So.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing it out that way, in that this is meant to be something that enhances our practice. It's not just an intellectual exercise or, something to brag about. Now I know the 3 words and I can, tell other people that they don't know as much as I do. And I did, that's not what you were saying at all. You were saying, oh yeah, this can enhance our practice, and we can learn that we make assumptions sometimes about what words mean. And, we're stuck with the English. Most of us don't know Pali. And it is an interesting practice to really start looking at these, like what could have been meant here, and what does that mean for my practice, and how does that enhance or differentiate or something. It is interesting, and if we take it in that way, we can actually deepen our understanding and help our meditation too. And by the way, there's quite a number of resources of Dharma in Spanish now. It's something that was started to be taken up more seriously, maybe 10, 15, even 20 years ago. There are groups that have it in Spanish, and I know people who have Spanish as their native language, and when they start to practice the Dharma and listen to Dharma talks in Spanish, there's something different that happens, it being the more mother tongue. So I don't know if you've explored any of those resources, but it can be yet a further enhancement. Yeah. Kate.
Hi, Kim. Well, this was the first time that I know that Karuna only means for meditative cultivation. Never knew that before. And my question is on the temporary liberation of the mind. So from what you just said, it means it's not only temporary, but it's also limited to, say, liberation from cruelty. It doesn't mean liberation in other dimension of the world.
It's temporary, and it's limited. Yeah, it's limited only in that particular area. So one would not, for example, be free of ignorance and delusion while in a liberation of mind by a loving kindness.
Okay. Yep, that's all my question. Thank you.
Okay, at least that's my understanding of what that refers to. I mean, they're very pure states. There's not a lot, there's not going to be a lot of, greed coming in or something like that, but it's not strong enough to uproot completely ignorance, for example. So that's why it's not an awakening. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, Joni.
Hi, thank you for this, Kim. This has been, I've learned so much. I'm noticing that Anakampa seems to be, the way I'm seeing it is more intentional of wishing for someone's best now and down the road. Whatever I would help you with now will help you in your future. So there's that sense of the best of for someone's welfare, whatever I do for you now or for myself will work out better down the road. I'm not saying that correctly. The other thing I wanted to mention was the word karunya, if I'm saying it correctly, has this sense of empathy in it, this care of and compassion, a sense of empathy. So I'm relating this with with the Noble Eightfold Path. You know, there's right view, ethics, and intention, and this seems to have very subtle differences with the same heartfelt intention. Is that? I know I'm not saying this correctly, but do you know? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
It sounds like you are so you're relating, are you thinking about the third wise intention of non-cruelty? So on the Eightfold Path, the three wise intentions are renunciation, non-ill will, and non-cruelty.
Yeah.
Which is supposed to inform all of our practice. So the Buddha gets around trying to put a positive word there, like which word for compassion should we put there, by literally saying non-cruelty. So the word is the negation of the word for cruelty. I may have missed some of what you said before that, though. So please repeat if I'm not getting the gist of it.
Yeah, I just think that there's an underlying sense of very subtle differences in these three words. And I think the heart of compassion is in all of them.
Yeah.
But there's just subtle differences of, like I mentioned last week, when I had to discipline my children, it was because I care about them, and
yeah,
it was hard to do.
And which
and
of these would you put on that, just out of curiosity?
I think for the karunya,
Uh-huh.
the sense
Okay.
of protection, that
Yeah.
intention of protection.
Great. There's no right answer to that question, by the way. Except,
Yeah.
your answer is the right answer. So, yeah, this is great, bringing it in. And I agree that there are some subtle differences. And then when we include all of them in this sphere, or I was trying to say spectrum of compassion, we get a broader sense of what that term can mean that might be obscured just by the fact that we use that one English word. And maybe it helps us unpack the English word a little bit also and realize that there's a lot packed into that. And I would agree, you also said the word empathy. I didn't respond to that. Yeah, certainly, if we're going to care about someone else's suffering or even act to help either their suffering or their welfare, we have to have some sense of them and where they are and what will be beneficial for them, what will help. So yeah, there's definitely empathy as a kind of a precondition. Thank you. Carrie.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I found this really interesting and helpful. I feel like at least in like lay teacher, sitting with lay teachers, there's a lot of emphasis, on Brahma Viharas, and that's kind of the only time I hear compassion talked about is as one of the Brahma Viharas. And it's part of the path to cultivate all four Brahma Viharas. We spend a lot of time on metta, not so much on the others generally. But the idea that acting to alleviate suffering or support the well-being of other people, that I feel like that is sometimes couched as like part of the precepts of like doing no harm. to know that there's suttas where it's just laid out, like, this is what the Buddha did. This is part of the path for us too.
Mhm.
And we don't have to like sneak it in and like, well, if you, I feel like engaged Buddhism often it's controversial sometimes, like, well, it's not really in there, but it is, it's right there, right?
It's there in a particular context, right? It's there in an ethical context of, doing things that will be for the welfare and the benefit of society in general, of people in general. Yeah, but I think we have to be pretty clear about getting the interpretation right. I think the Buddha would have agreed with social action that was about instilling ethics and that came from this heart of care, concern, not anger, fear, judgment. Right. And we have this liberation of mind that would include all beings, even those that we struggle against would be included in our care and love. It's a tall order, but I think really, really good for our development. Yeah, thank you. Deborah.
I think something that's helpful to keep in mind is the reason for cultivating the Brahma Viharas is for our own welfare. So even while we are developing feeling metta for all beings, even those that we might find loathsome, the reason we do it is because it benefits us, our mental well-being. This is something Ajahn Sona talks about a lot, and it's the same with compassion, because people make the mistake of thinking my friend is suffering, so I should have empathy, and that I'm suffering too. But really, that's just adding more suffering to suffering. So that what we're supposed to be doing is feeling love and friendliness and care for that person while in the face of their suffering. While not adding to our suffering, and then hopefully alleviating their suffering to some extent, although that's a little bit less of the focus than just maintaining our own kind of well-being.
Yeah, that's nicely said, is that the first care is to have it just in our heart, this care for the other without falling into their pain and suffering ourselves, but still being present for it, as you said, being with it, being in it, but not taking it on. So yeah, and the Brahma Viharas bring us the strength to be able to do that. And then we can choose whether we act or not. If it's appropriate, we would act, and maybe we don't need to in a certain case. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, well then, since we've had the emphasis on meditative cultivation, I thought we would do a Brahma Vihara compassion meditation this evening. So let's practice together. I'm going to offer it in the same style as is done by the monk Venerable Analayo, which is a radiation practice. Just like it was actually listed in that teaching. Remember about they pervade 1/4 with compassion, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above, below, around, and everywhere. That will be kind of the orientation. So it's based on Venerable Analayo's version. So finding a posture and a place where you can sit for a little while. And just bringing the attention inward. If it's comfortable, you can close your eyes. And allowing yourself to sense where you're sitting, your seat against the chair or the cushion. Legs or feet against the floor, so we have a stable foundation where we're sitting. Maybe taking a moment to just breathe gently, and so that we can let go of the thoughts we've been having and the energy that comes from speech and even listening to speech. using our mind to understand. So just softening, maybe softening the eyes and the eye sockets, softening the jaw. Letting the shoulders drop. Softening the belly. And bring to mind a being for whom it's easy to feel a connection to. Actually, it should be a simple relationship. So maybe not your partner, for example, but maybe like a pet. An animal is pretty easy, or a baby. Someone where it's very easy to just have a sense of care. We want the best for this being. We feel some warmth or a simple smile even when we think of them. And as we think of the being, we bring the attention to the heart area, not the physical heart, but just the kind of area of the chest energetically. So we have the image and the attention resting in the heart area. Maybe even imagining breathing in and out through the front of the chest. Or if that's too weird, knowing that the breath flows down into the lungs, which do surround the heart. So holding this being in our heart with our sense of care for them. It may include a sense of protection. If anything were to threaten or harm this being, we would care for that. We would want to act for their well-being. As you breathe in and out, perhaps strengthening that feeling of care and compassion on the in-breath. And then on the out-breath, imagining some kind of energy from that expanding outward from the heart. Just in a very simple way, not going very far. Kind of creating a rhythm of strengthening the quality and letting it breathe out. If you feel kind of an energetic dimension of this care, letting it spread through the body. And as you continue with this meditation, gently, gradually replace the image of the being with the feeling in your heart, just going with the feeling. And as you breathe in, strengthening that quality, imagine that the heart is a star that is beginning to shine. Breathe in, the star gets a little brighter. And when we breathe out, we imagine the rays of light emanating naturally from the star. Might be a little star, might be a big one, doesn't matter. Breathing in, breathing out. We don't need to push the light outward. Stars don't push their light out. They just shine. And the light flows naturally. And in this case, it doesn't matter how far it goes. Maybe it just goes as far as your skin or out into the room a little bit. It's not like infinite or anything, but we don't limit it. And now we consider that we might have unconsciously a few barriers to our care and concern. And so we imagine that we're surrounded by a curtain. And we imagine pulling that curtain aside in front of us. We pull it out in the forward direction. And now the light from our heart is shining unimpeded out in front of us. As far as it goes, doesn't matter how far, but there's no bound on it, no limit. Now we pull the curtain around to our right side. Light can shine out unimpeded to our right. Pull it around to the back, and the light shines unimpeded behind us. Sometimes that's a little harder to imagine because we don't look behind us, but the light can shine behind us, out as far as it goes. Drawing the curtain now around to the left. So the light is now shining unimpeded in front, to the right, to the back, to the left, all around us. This light of our care, our concern, our empathy. Then we imagine it shining out above, everywhere above us. And down below, it's not hindered at all by floors or ground. This light can shine right through solid objects. So the star in our chest sits in the middle and shines out in all directions. Not pushing, not trying too hard. It actually shines more easily the less hard we try. Relax so that it can just shine. Radiating compassion in all directions. And we notice that in order to shine outward, the light first passes through every one of our cells. We are always the first recipient of this radiation from the heart. And letting that pervade all of your tissues as it shines outward in a natural, simple, easy way. And just resting. And then gently softening the mind, releasing the intention to radiate compassion just in a gentle way. Let it float away, keeping the eyes closed, and just return to the sense of breathing. Sensations in the body. And then just let go with the mind into the present moment, the flow of whatever experiences are coming up in your body and mind. Yeah, so this is the method offered in these early teachings for strengthening this quality of karuna, meditative compassion. So I do just have a few last things to say as we're wrapping up. In the Buddhist texts, the primary example of compassionate action is teaching the Dharma. Not surprisingly, that's the one that comes up the most. And the Buddhist teaching is concerned with helping people to find their way out of dukkha. So yes, there is acting to alleviate suffering, definitely, and also to help them cultivate qualities that are beautiful and liberating and transformative. So we can't quite say that the Buddha only focuses on the suffering of beings. He also focuses on their development and their happiness. So if we were to start with this idea that the Buddha interacts with people for their benefit and welfare, as it says in the texts, we could start with that. And then we might be able to look at some passages where the Buddha is teaching and read them with this idea that he's aiming to help and benefit the person. So next time we'll look a little bit more at Anukampa, because we didn't quite finish that one, but we'll also look at some additional examples of the Buddha's teaching, some of which are even a little unconventional or surprising. And but we'll ask, we'll do it with the kind of that lens of how might this be beneficial for beings. So I guess the last thing is that sometimes people ask how they can support the Sati Center and the teachers, and so I wanted to provide the Donna link for this particular class. And you can always do it also from the Sati Center website, but this donation link is specifically for this class. So that's offered. Thank you for being here. Are there any last comments or questions to feel complete? Okay, we'll have a beautiful evening and week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.